In 1610, a woman named Maria de Zazoya confessed to murdering 840 people. But here's the thing, she couldn't have killed a single one of them. And the device that forced this impossible confession, it's the reason you're about to witness the most mathematically precise instrument of agony ever created. The screams echo off stone walls. A woman hangs suspended by ropes, her body trembling. Below her, a wooden stool topped with a metal pyramid. Its point sharp enough to pierce skin, but deliberately calculated, blunt enough to do something far worse than kill. This is the Judas cradle, and by the end of this video, you'll understand 3 things that will haunt you. First, the geometric design that weaponized gravity itself, turning the human body into its own executioner. Second, why victims survived for days in unimaginable agony and why that was exactly the point. And third, the confession that accidentally exposed the fatal flaw in Europe's entire torture system, changing legal history forever. But before we go deeper into this nightmare, hit that subscribe button right now, because what I'm about to reveal at the 8-minute mark is the single most disturbing detail I found in the historical records, and it's going to completely change how you think about justice itself. To understand how something this evil could exist, we need to go back to 1478 Spain, because the Judas cradle wasn't created by sadists in a dungeon, it was designed by bureaucrats in a palace. Picture this. It's 1478, and Catholic monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella have just done something unprecedented. They've created the Spanish Inquisition not as a mob of angry fanatics, but as an organized bureaucracy of torture. They have offices, they have paperwork, they have standardized procedures, and they have a problem. Burning heretics at the stake is effective for execution, sure, but it's too effective. The accused dies in minutes, sometimes seconds if the smoke gets them first. There's no time for confession. No time for them to reveal other heretics. No time to make an example that lasts. So the Inquisition's engineers, yes, they actually had engineers, got creative. They needed something that would, 1, keep the victim alive for days, maximizing time for confession. 2, inflict escalating agony without leaving visible marks that might horrify the public. 3, operate automatically using the victim's own body weight against them. The result, the Judas cradle, named after history's most famous betrayer, because this device made everyone betray someone, their friends, their family, themselves. And here's the truly twisted logic. Inquisition records actually called it merciful. Merciful. Because compared to being burned alive, well, at least you got a few more days to reconcile with God. Within decades, the design spread from Spain to Italy, Germany, France, and beyond. Not through force, but through recommendation. Inquisitors wrote to each other praising its efficiency, its psychological impact, the confessions it produced. But what made it so effective? 3 design features that made this the most dreaded device in history. And I'm warning you now, the first one is going to make your skin crawl. Imagine you're an Inquisition engineer in 1480. Your job is to create pain that never ends. How do you do that? You start with geometry. The Judas cradle's pyramid point was typically 4 to 6 in tall, crafted from wood or metal, and mounted on a sturdy stool or platform. But here's what makes it genius in the most horrifying way possible. The angle. The tip wasn't needle sharp. That would penetrate too quickly, causing fatal injury within hours. Instead, historical records from the Directorium Inquisitorium, the Inquisition's actual instruction manual from 1376, specifying vital organs, sharp enough to apply concentrated, unrelenting pressure. The victim, usually stripped naked, was suspended above the point using a system of ropes attached to their wrists. Then came the slow descent, inch by agonizing inch. Guards controlled the ropes, lowering the accused until the pyramid's tip pressed against the anus vagina, or sometimes the tailbone. The victim's own body weight provided the force, roughly 100 to 150 lb of constant, inescapable pressure, concentrated on an area smaller than a coin. But here's what the diagrams don't show you. Here's what I found buried in physician accounts from the era. The human body, when subjected to this kind of stress, enters survival mode. Muscles tense involuntarily, trying to lift you away from the pain. Your legs shake, your abs contract. Every fiber of your being fights to push yourself upward. For the first hour, maybe 2. Adrenaline helps. You can hold yourself up partially, reducing the pressure. You're in control. But then, and this is where the mathematical precision becomes truly demonic, muscle fatigue sets in. Your body cannot maintain that tension. Gravity is patient. Gravity never gets tired. As your muscles fail, you sink lower. The pressure increases. The pain intensifies. You try to shift your weight to distribute it differently, but that only accelerates the tearing of tissue. The cradle rocks slightly with your movements, creating a soaring motion. Victims reported, those who survived, that the worst part wasn't even the physical penetration. It was knowing that sleep meant death. Because if you lost consciousness, if exhaustion finally claimed you, your full body weight would drive down onto that point. So you fought sleep for hours, then days. Guards sometimes added weights to ankles, or would occasionally pull therapies to make the victim drop suddenly, then catch them. Psychological torture layered on top of physical agony. The anticipation of impact became its own form of hell. And all of this, every geometric calculation, every measured angle, every rope mechanism was designed, planned, standardized across Europe. But the real horror wasn't the pain itself. The real horror was what happened after 3 days on the cradle. Something that made victims beg not for death, but for something so much worse. Because the Judas cradle wasn't built to kill quickly. It was built to kill slowly. And the biology of that process is nightmare fuel. Let me walk you through what happens to the human body during days on the Judas cradle. And I promise you, this is going to answer the question you're probably asking yourself. Why didn't they just die? Historical physician accounts from the Bamberg witch trials of 1627-1632 documented this in disturbing detail. These weren't sadists. They were doctors recording observations for medical journals, which somehow makes it worse. The timeline looked like this. Hour 1 to 6, the shock phase. Your body floods with adrenaline and cortisol. Pain receptors fire constantly, but your brain almost dissociates from it. Victims described feeling like they were watching their own torture from outside their bodies. Heart rate spikes to 140 beats per minute. You're hyperventilating. The pressure begins causing micro tears in tissue, but nothing fatal. Not yet. Hour 6 to 24, the breaking point. This is when muscle fatigue becomes insurmountable. Your body weight is now fully resting on the pyramid point. The pressure concentrated on such a small area begins causing significant tissue damage. But here's the key. The blunt angle means it's tearing and crushing, not puncturing through. Blood flow to the area is compromised but not stopped. Nerve endings are compressed and damaged, creating a type of pain physicians described as all-consuming, not sharp, not stabbing. A crushing, burning, endless agony that has no crescendo because it never stops intensifying. And you're still alive, still conscious. Day 2 to 3, the infection. Now the cradle's true genius reveals itself. The wounds created by prolonged pressure become entry points for bacteria. Remember, we're talking about contact with fecal matter, unwashed wood or metal, and the victim's own bodily fluids pooling beneath them. Infection sets in rapidly. Sepsis begins spreading through the bloodstream. Fever spikes. Delirium comes in waves. And this is crucial, sepsis takes 3 to 7 days to kill a healthy adult. The inquisitors knew this. The manuals reference this timing. They weren't trying to execute prisoners on the cradle. They were creating a window of suffering long enough to extract confessions, names, accusations. But there's another factor that broke prisoners even faster than pain. Sleep deprivation. Imagine you've been awake for 48 hours in constant agony while infection ravages your body. Your mind starts fracturing. Hallucinations begin. You see faces in the shadows, hear voices. The guards asking questions blend with memories, with nightmares, with delirium. Prisoners confess to anything, everything, not because the pain broke them, though it certainly helped, but because their minds literally couldn't distinguish reality from interrogation-induced fantasy anymore. And here's the 3-stage progression that physicians documented. Stage 1, resistance and denial. Victims maintained innocence, begged for mercy, prayed loudly. Stage 2, bargaining and partial confession. Victims admitted to minor heresies, tried to give interrogators something to make it stop. Stage 3, complete psychological collapse. Victims confessed to anything suggested to them, including physical impossibilities. Which brings us to one woman whose Stage 3 confession was so absurd, so impossibly elaborate that it accidentally exposed the fatal flaw in the entire torture system. Don't click away yet, because Maria de Soya's story is about to reveal how one woman on a Judas cradle changed European law forever. but not in the way you'd expect. Her case started like thousands of others. An accusation of witchcraft, an arrest and a date with the pyramid. But what she confessed to was impossible. It's 1610 in Logroño, Spain. Maria de Zoya is 52 years old, a midwife, and she's just been accused of witchcraft by a neighbor who claims Maria's evil eye cursed her crops. Standard Inquisition procedure: arrest, interrogation, and if no confession comes, escalate to torture. They place her on the Judith cradle on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, roughly 30 hours later, Maria begins talking, and she doesn't stop for 6 hours. The confession, preserved in the Logroño Inquisition archives, is 47 pages long. I'm going to read you just 3 lines translated from Spanish. I confess to attending Sabbaths on 214 occasions over 12 years, where I murdered 840 children by mixing toad venom with their mother's milk. And I flew to these gatherings on a goat provided by the devil himself, who appeared as a man with eyes of fire. 840 children in a town with a population of barely 3,000 people total. The math is staggering. That's 70 murdered children per year, more than 1 per week for 12 consecutive years in a small town where everyone knows everyone, where a single missing child would trigger immediate searches and town-wide panic, and nobody noticed. But here's what makes this even more absurd. Parish death records from Logroño during those 12 years show normal childhood mortality rates, about 1,215 deaths per year from disease and accident. The 840 murdered children Maria confessed to killing simply didn't exist. Yet the inquisitors wrote it all down, accepted it as truth, prepared to execute her based on this confession until one man asked a dangerous question. Alonso de Salazar Frias was a younger inquisitor assigned to review the Basque witch trials. He read Maria's confession, then he read dozens more like it. Women confessing to flying, to shape-shifting, to attending impossible gatherings with hundreds of witches in remote locations. All on the same nights, they were documented being in their homes by family members. Salazar did something radical. He investigated. He traveled to the towns mentioned in confessions, checked birth and death records, interviewed witnesses, cross-referenced timelines, and what he found shattered the Inquisition's entire justification for torture. Every single confession obtained through torture contained impossibilities, geographic contradictions, timeline errors, claims that violated basic physics. But here's what nobody tells you about what happened next. Here's the part that gets left out of history books. Salazar didn't free the prisoners. He couldn't. The system wouldn't allow it. Maria de Zoya died of her infections 3 weeks after her confession. Still in custody, never tried. But Salazar wrote a report, a scathing, methodical dismantling of torture as an investigative tool. He presented it to the Spanish Supreme Council in 1612 and included this line: "There were neither witches nor bewitched until they were talked and written about." Other words, torture doesn't reveal truth. It creates whatever truth the interrogator wants to hear. The Supreme Council shockingly agreed. They issued new guidelines, severely limiting torture in witchcraft cases. Other European courts began citing Salazar's findings. The use of the Judas cradle declined slowly, reluctantly but measurably over the next century. Maria's impossible confession, born from delirium and agony on a wooden pyramid, had exposed the system's fatal flaw. Torture doesn't produce evidence, it produces compliance. The Judas cradle didn't disappear entirely, because 172 years later in 1782, one woman's encounter with it became a turning point that finally ended its reign of terror across Europe. And that story, that's the one that's going to stay with you long after this video ends. Her name was Anna Gildy. She was Europe's last legal victim of execution for witchcraft. And they used the cradle one final time. I know this is getting dark. I know you're probably feeling a bit sick right now. I certainly did researching this, but if you're still watching, you're clearly as fascinated by history's brutal truths as I am. So make sure you're subscribed, because next week I'm revealing the execution method so brutal, so horrifying that it was banned after being used exactly one time. And the reason it was banned, it's not what you think. Alright, let's talk about Anna Gildy, because her story is the culmination of everything we've discussed. June 13th, 1782, Glara, Switzerland. Anna Giraldi is 48 years old, a domestic servant working for a physician named Jan Jakob Tischudi. One morning, Tischud's 8-year-old daughter begins having convulsions and vomiting. She claims she found needles in her milk. Tishudi accuses Anna of witchcraft. She's arrested immediately. Now here's what makes this case remarkable. It's 1782. The Enlightenment is in full swing. Voltaire died 4 years ago. The American Revolution just ended. Europe is supposed to be entering an age of reason, of scientific thinking, of human rights, and yet Anna Gildy is brought before a court formally accused of diabolical witchcraft and sentenced to torture to extract confession. They bring out the Judas cradle. According to trial transcripts preserved in the Glaris archives, which I'm showing you right now, Anna was subjected to the cradle for approximately 18 hours across 2 sessions. The records use clinical language. The accused was positioned on the implement according to traditional procedure. In 1782, after the second session, delirious from pain and infection, Anna confessed to making a pact with the devil, who appeared to her as a black dog with fiery eyes. She admitted to poisoning the child's milk with needles blessed by demons. The court sentenced her to death. But here's where something unprecedented happened. News of the trial spread not just locally across Europe. Newspapers in Germany, France, and England published articles expressing outrage. The Enlightenment intellectuals who'd been writing about human rights suddenly had a real-world test case. The Swiss government in Bern received dozens of petitions demanding intervention. The Glaris court was bombarded with letters from legal scholars pointing out that torch-extracted confessions had been discredited for decades, but the local court refused to back down. On June 13, 1782, Anna Giraldi was executed by beheading in the public square. And then finally, something broke. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Within weeks, the Swiss Confederation launched an investigation into the Glaris court. The judges who sentenced Anna were formally censured. But more importantly, the case became a rallying cry. Emperor Joseph of Austria, watching from Vienna, issued the Penal Code of 1787 that formally abolished torture throughout the Habsburg Empire. Other German states followed. France banned judicial torture in 1789. The dominoes were falling. But here's what nobody tells you, the detail that's going to haunt you. The Judas cradle devices weren't destroyed. Many were preserved and are currently on display in museums across Europe. You can see them in the Medieval Criminal Museum in Rothenburg, Germany, in the Museum of Torture in Vienna, in private collections across the continent. The pyramid that may have been used on Anna Gildy herself is believed to be in the Swiss National Museum, though it's rarely displayed. Curators argue it's too disturbing, too graphic, but it's there in storage, a physical reminder of what humans are capable of justifying. Anna's execution, Europe's last legal torture for witchcraft, sparked reforms that eventually led to the Geneva Conventions of 1949, which explicitly banned torture in international law. Her suffering, senseless and brutal as it was, became a historical marker. The moment Europe collectively said, never again. From instrument of torture to catalyst for human rights. From pyramid of pain to symbol of why we must never forget. So let's put this in perspective. Over approximately 3 centuries, from the late 1400s to 1782, historians estimate that the Judas cradle was used on at least 5,000 documented victims across Europe. The actual number is likely far higher, since many Inquisition records were destroyed or never existed for smaller jurisdictions. 5,000 people who experienced days of unimaginable agony because of a geometric design, a calculated angle, and a bureaucracy that turns suffering into procedure. But here's why this matters today. Here's why I spent weeks researching this, and why you've spent 20 minutes watching. The Judas cradle wasn't created by monsters. It was created by officials who believed they were protecting society, by religious authorities who thought they were saving souls, by engineers who were just solving technical problems. That's the lesson. Torture doesn't require evil people. It requires good people who convince themselves that extreme measures are justified, that the ends justify the means, that this one person's suffering will prevent greater suffering. And when we forget that, when we allow ourselves to believe that enhanced interrogation or necessary measures or any other euphemism is somehow different, we are one small step away from rebuilding the pyramid. The Geneva Conventions, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the international laws against torture that we take for granted today, all of them have roots in cases like Maria de Zazoya's impossible confession and Anna Gild's senseless execution. The suffering brought us a promise. Never again. Which brings me to my question for you, and I genuinely want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Should museums continue displaying these torture devices? On one hand, they're powerful educational tools, physical evidence of what happens when society abandons human dignity. Seeing the actual pyramid, the actual ropes, makes the history real in a way textbooks cannot. When you stand in front of the Judas cradle at the Medieval Criminal Museum in Rothenburg, you're confronting the physical reality of what humans did to each other. On the other hand, do we risk glorifying this horror, turning suffering into spectacle? There are medieval torture museums that market themselves as tourist attractions, complete with gift shops, selling miniature torture device keychains. That feels wrong, deeply wrong. Where's the line between remembering history and exploiting trauma, between education and entertainment? Drop your thoughts below. I'm genuinely curious how you all think we should handle this. There's no easy answer, and I want to hear different perspectives. And before you go, remember, I promised you something for next week. I'm investigating the execution method that was so unthinkably brutal, so beyond the pale, that after it was used one single time, every European nation immediately banned it by unanimous agreement. No debates, no gradual reforms, one use, instant ban. What could possibly be worse than what you just learned about? Hit subscribe to find out, because trust me, you're not going to believe this one. It involves an elephant, a condemned prisoner, and a decision that haunted an entire empire. Thanks for watching, and seriously, go hug someone you love. After diving into this darkness for 20 minutes, we all need to remember what humanity looks like.